Every spring, millions of gardeners step outside with so much hope, only to find their favorite potted plants dead, dry, and gone. And here's the truth. It's not because you didn't care for them. It's because you chose the wrong way to overwinter them. Should you leave them in pots or plant them in the ground? This one decision can mean the difference between a blooming, colorful spring and a heartbreaking loss. Before we jump in, if you love gardening tips that actually save your plants and your money, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. That way, you won't miss the next video where I'll share the top perennials that actually do better in pots than in the ground. Trust me, you'll want to see that. All right, let's get started. Today, I'll walk you through everything you need to know about overwintering your perennials, step by step in simple English. We'll compare containers versus ground. I'll show you what works best in different USDA zones, and I'll give you my exact secrets to keep your plants alive and ready for a blooming spring. So grab a cup of tea and let's dive in. Here's the painful truth. Most perennials don't die in winter because they're weak. They die because of how we treat them. Roots freeze. In the ground, roots are protected by soil. In a pot, roots are exposed to air temperatures, and that means they freeze faster. Drying out. Winter winds and dry soil pull out every drop of moisture, and by the time spring comes, the roots are too dry to wake up. Pot damage. Clay or ceramic pots can crack when wet soil expands with freezing temperatures. Wrong zone. A perennial that's hardy in Zone 6 might not survive in a pot outdoors in Zone 6. Why? Because pots lose warmth, so it's almost like moving the plant to a colder zone. So if you've ever wondered why your beautiful lavender, mums, or coneflowers didn't make it through the winter, it's not you, it's the method. But don't worry, I'm about to show you exactly how to fix it. When it comes to overwintering perennials, the ground is your plant's natural blanket. Soil protects roots from the harshest cold, and in many cases, it's the safest place for hardy perennials to ride out the winter. But here's the thing, how you protect them depends on the zone you live in. Let's break this down step by step. The first step is to cut back your perennials once the frost hits and the foliage starts to brown. Don't worry about cutting too much. Most perennials actually prefer going into winter with their energy stored safely in their roots. Remove the dead stems and leaves, but leave just a few inches above the ground so you can see where the plant is. The second step is watering before the freeze. Many gardeners think it's cold, so I don't need to water, but that's exactly why so many perennials fail. Dry soil pulls moisture out of the roots, and when freezing temperatures arrive, the plant can't recover. Give your perennials a deep drink in late fall, just before the ground locks up. The third step, and this one is non-negotiable, is mulching. Mulch is like a winter coat for your plants. A thick layer keeps soil temperatures steady, prevents sudden freeze-thaw cycles, and traps moisture where roots need it most. The type of mulch doesn't matter as much as the thickness. You can use shredded leaves, straw, pine needles, or bark chips, but aim for at least 4 to 6 inches. Now, let's talk zones, because this is where the details make all the difference. If you're in a cold northern zone like Zone 3 to 5, winters are brutal. Your soil will freeze hard and your plants need extra protection. For you, mulch thick, sometimes even 8 inches. And don't be afraid to add an extra layer of protection like a pile of leaves or even a burlap cover, especially for young or tender plants. In these zones, mulch isn't just helpful, it's survival. If you're gardening in Zones 6 and 7, you're in what I call the middle ground. Winters are cold, but not quite as unforgiving. Most hardy perennials will be just fine with 4 to 6 inches of mulch. Focus on covering the crowns of your plants well, and make sure you water before the soil freezes. For borderline tender perennials, though, it's still a good idea to give them a little extra cover. Think of it as tucking them in a bit more snugly. Now, for the lucky gardeners in zones 8 and 9, winters are mild. You may not even see snow, but don't let that fool you. Sudden cold snaps can still damage unprotected roots. For you, a light mulch of 2 to 3 inches is often enough. Your goal is less about keeping plants warm and more about protecting them from those surprise temperature swings. Here's something important to remember. Overwintering in the ground always gives your plants an advantage compared to pots because soil is a natural insulator. But you must match your level of protection to your zone. Think of it this way. If you're in zone 4, overwintering without mulch is like walking outside in January without a coat. You'll survive for a little while, but you'll be miserable, and chances are you won't make it through the season. On the other hand, if you're in zone 8, a heavy layer of mulch might actually trap too much moisture, which can cause rot. So tailor your care to your zone, and your plants will reward you with fresh green shoots as soon as spring returns. Let's move on to perennials in containers, because this is where most gardeners struggle, and it's also where most plants get lost over the winter. See, pots are beautiful, convenient, and flexible, but when winter comes, pots turn into traps. The roots are sitting above the ground, which means they're exposed to the same temperature as the air outside. And while soil in the ground stays insulated, soil in a pot can freeze solid. That's why the same perennial that would survive in the ground can die in a pot in the very same yard. But the good news is, with the right method, you can absolutely save your container perennials. Let's walk through the exact steps. The first step is to choose a good location for your pots. If you can move them, place them in an unheated garage, shed, cold frame, or even a basement that stays cold but doesn't freeze. These spaces keep your plants dormant without exposing them to the harshest outdoor temperatures. The second step is insulating your pots. If moving them indoors isn't possible, you'll need to give them an artificial winter coat. Wrap them in burlap, bubble wrap, or old blankets. Another trick is to place your pot inside a larger container and stuff the space in between with leaves, straw, or even shredded paper. The goal is to keep the soil temperature from bouncing up and down. The third step is grouping your pots together. Just like people huddle in the cold to share body heat, pots protect each other when clustered close. Place them against a wall, preferably on the side of the house that gets the least wind, and you'll cut down on exposure. The fourth step is mulching the top of the soil. Cover the crown of the plant with straw, pine needles, or leaves. This extra layer shields the most vulnerable part of the plant. And finally, don't forget watering. Even in dormancy, roots need a little moisture. Check your pots once a month. If the soil feels bone dry, give it just enough water to moisten, but not so much that it turns soggy. Overwatering is just as dangerous as letting them dry out. Now let's bring in the zones, because this is where the real difference comes in. If you live in zones 3 to 5, your winters are severe. Leaving pots outside is almost always a death sentence, even for hardy plants. In these zones, your best bet is to move pots indoors into a cold but sheltered spot, or to bury the entire pot in the ground and cover it with soil and mulch. This trick turns your pot into an underground bunker, safe from the coldest winds. For gardeners in zones 6 and 7, you have more flexibility. Some hardy plants can survive outdoors in pots with proper insulation, but I still recommend at least wrapping them and clustering them together. Tender perennials, though, should be moved indoors if you want to be sure they'll make it. These middle zones can swing between mild and harsh, so it's always better to be safe than sorry. And for those in zones 8 and 9, you've got the easiest job. Most perennials will survive the winter in pots right where they are. A little mulch on top and perhaps a light wrap for sudden cold snaps is usually enough. Your main concern isn't freezing, it's unexpected dips in temperature that stress the plant. Here's something important to remember. Overwintering in containers requires more attention than in the ground. Pots dry out faster, they crack in freezing conditions, and roots are always more vulnerable. But with a little care, moving, wrapping, mulching, and watering, your potted perennials can thrive year after year, even in the coldest climates. So don't give up on containers. They just need a bit more love in the winter, and in return, they'll give you that burst of color and life the moment spring arrives. Now that we've looked at both methods, it's time for the big question. Which one should you choose? Should you leave your perennials in pots, or should you plant them in the ground for winter? The answer depends on three things: your plant's hardiness, your zone, and the space you have available. Here's a simple checklist to guide you. First, ask yourself, is this perennial hardy in my zone? If the answer is yes, the ground is usually the best and safest option. The soil acts like nature's blanket, and as long as you mulch correctly, your plant will come back strong in spring. Second, if the plant is borderline hardy, meaning it just barely survives in your zone, then a container gives you more control. In this case, pots are your safety net because you can move them to a sheltered location when temperatures drop too low. Third, look at your zone conditions. If you're in a cold zone, like 3 to 5, the ground with heavy mulch is safer for very hardy plants, while borderline plants need to be in protected containers. If you're in zones 6 or 7, you have options. Hardy plants can stay in the ground, but containers are great for those tender perennials that don't always make it. And if you're in zones 8 and 9, your winters are so mild that most perennials can stay right where they are, either in pots or in the ground with only light protection. And fourth, think about your space. If you don't have a garage, basement, or shed to move your pots into, you may be better off planting perennials directly in the ground and mulching them. On the other hand, if you love the flexibility of rearranging pots, then commit to insulating and checking on them through the winter. Here's an easy way to remember it. Hardy in your zone? Ground. Tender or borderline? Pot with protection. No storage space? Ground with mulch. Extra space available? Containers give more control. Every gardener's situation is different, but when you match your plant's needs to your zone and your resources, you'll always make the right choice. So instead of guessing this winter, use this checklist. Think about your plant, your climate, and your space, and you'll know exactly where your perennials belong. Before we wrap things up, let me share some bonus tips and also a few mistakes I see gardeners make every single winter. Avoiding these mistakes alone could save you dozens of plants. First bonus tip, don't fertilize in late fall. Many gardeners think they're giving their plants a boost before winter, but what actually happens is the fertilizer pushes out new, tender growth, and that young growth is the first thing the frost kills. Instead, stop fertilizing at least 6 weeks before your first expected frost. That way, your plants harden off naturally and prepare for dormancy. Second, always check for pests before moving pots indoors. It's tempting to just pick up a pot and set it in the garage, but pests like cutworms, slugs, and even aphids can hide in the soil or on the leaves. Once inside, they multiply because they're not facing the natural predators they'd normally see outdoors. A quick rinse of the plant and even scraping away the top layer of soil can prevent major problems. Third tip, choose the right container material. If you're leaving pots outside, avoid clay and ceramic. They look beautiful, but they're fragile in freezing temperatures. Plastic, resin, or even thick wooden planters can withstand the freeze-thaw cycle much better. So if you've lost pots to cracks in past winters, this small change will save you money and heartbreak. Here's a clever DIY trick. If you don't have room indoors, try the trench method. Dig a trench in your garden, place the pots inside, and then backfill around them with soil and mulch. It's like creating a temporary underground shelter for your pots. This is especially useful in zones 3 to 5, where outdoor pots rarely survive without extra protection. Now let's talk about the mistakes. The first big mistake is not mulching enough. A thin layer won't cut it in cold zones. If you live in zone 5 or below, think of mulch like a thick winter blanket. Pile it on. The second mistake is forgetting to water. Many gardeners assume that winter means moisture, but in reality, pots can dry out quickly, especially in sheltered spots like garages. A plant that dries out completely in winter often doesn't wake up in spring. A quick monthly water check solves that. The third mistake is leaving pots exposed to the wind. Wind chill can be just as damaging as cold. Always cluster your pots together against a wall or a fence to give them that shared protection. And the final mistake is treating all zones the same. What works in zone 8 doesn't work in zone 4. Ignoring your zone is the fastest way to lose plants. Always adjust your overwintering strategy to match your climate. Remember this, a little planning in fall saves you a lot of disappointment in spring. Avoid these mistakes, follow the bonus tips, and your perennials will reward you with healthy, vibrant growth when the season turns. All right, let's make this even clearer with some real examples because I know it can feel overwhelming when we just talk theory. If you're in zone 3 or 4, winters are brutally cold. Think about hostas or daylilies in pots. If you leave those outside without protection, the pots will freeze solid and the roots won't stand a chance. In these zones, your best bet is the trench method or moving pots into an unheated garage. And remember, water just enough so the soil doesn't go bone dry. That's the difference between a plant waking up strong or never waking up at all. Now, let's move up to zone 5 and 6. Here's a good example. Coneflowers or black-eyed Susans in pots. With a thick layer of mulch and pots grouped together on the ground, these plants can survive outdoors. If you want extra insurance, push the pots right up against your house wall. That little bit of heat radiating from your home can protect the roots during the coldest nights. In zones 7 and 8, the rules shift. Plants like lavender or salvia in containers often survive winter outdoors with just light mulching. But here's the catch. Wet soil is the killer, not just cold. If you get lots of rain, make sure your pots have excellent drainage. Elevating them on bricks or pot feet prevents soggy roots, which is the silent killer in mild winter zones. And finally, in zone 9 and warmer, overwintering is less about surviving the cold and more about protecting from occasional surprise frosts. Citrus in pots, for example, might only need a frost cloth on a few nights each winter. The bigger risk is pests hiding in pots when the weather warms up again, so keep those plants clean and don't get too relaxed just because your winters are mild. See how the strategy changes with the zone? The climate you live in really shapes what you need to do. That's why there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But once you know your zone, the right steps become much simpler. So now you know the secrets to keeping your potted perennials alive, whether you're in freezing zone 3, a rainy zone 8, or a mild zone 9. You've learned when to move pots inside, when to use mulch, how to group them together, and even the trench method for tough winters. Remember, overwintering isn't about doing everything perfectly. It's about giving your plants just enough protection so they rest safely through the cold months and wake up in spring full of life. A little planning in fall brings you a garden bursting with color when warm weather returns. Now, here's what I'd love you to do. Drop a comment below telling me what zone you're in and which perennials you'll be protecting this year. I read every single comment, and your experiences might just help another gardener watching this video. If you found this guide helpful, make sure you hit that like button. It really helps more gardeners find this channel. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell because I've got more simple step-by-step gardening tips coming your way every week. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. we'll be talking about easy perennials that practically guarantee blooms every spring without fuss. That's coming up next, so stick around and watch that video after this one. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, protect those pots now, and your spring garden will thank you later.